Opara Taldor, end of spring of 4718. A tidy townhouse in the Aridans View district. It had been fewer than 5 days before Martella felt she had recuperated well enough to call on her allies again and reconvene. In that time, the town of Opara was going through a period of recovery, following the turmoil of what the people had started calling the Exaltation Day Massacre. For his part, Aurelius Betinos was paying close attention to local politics following the massacre. It seemed in the ensuing riots, Grand Prince Stavian had either died unexpectedly of natural causes or been killed. It was unclear exactly which. Princess Eutropia had issued a public statement via proxy that the primogeniture reform had passed, and that she was therefore the rightful heir and would step up and take position of Grand Princess, but this was countered by Grand Strategos Maxillar Pytherius, who made an appearance 2 days after the massacre in person to put forth his own claim. Aurelius had gone to see this, as had Diyanah and Demi. Marius and Martella had not been present for that, Martella being still in recovery, and Marius having spent every waking moment working on repairing his tavern. Demi and Diyanah had had to try to calm down Aurelius, as he seethed in rage at the way in which the Grand Strategos had spun the events of the massacre. "The primogeniture reform was not ratified," he proclaimed, "nor the vote confirmed. Moreover, Eutropia's father, having foreseen the treachery of his daughter, and these events, which are so clearly an attempted coup, had me sign this paperwork." He held aloft a number of papers, "which clearly and provably demonstrates that he agreed to adopt me as his son and the heir of his throne and legacy. What our enemies will see in these moments is Taldor in a state of weakness. Our ancient enemies in Katheer stir as we struggle in disarray. What we need now is strength, stability, and continuity. What Taldor needs is Grand Prince Pytherius." Then his hated nemesis Grand Strategos had marched a small army on the palace. But the Ulfin Guard, in particular their leader and acting governor of Opara, Baron Ultar Vinmark, had locked down the palace. The Ulfin Guard, it seemed, were sworn to the throne and the emperor, but as no emperor was agreed to, they would remain neutral. Ultar had come out from the palace announcing that in the absence of a clear successor, that the Grand Dukes must decide unanimously on the next Grand Prince, and until that point the high seat of the country would remain protected from military conquest by the Ulfin Guard. Evidently Pytherius had thought better of murdering the Ulfin Guard with his forces and taking the palace by force. He was reserving military conquest until he was sure that a political victory wasn't possible. He abandoned the palace and traveled towards his lands to the south of the country, while sending envoys to the various corners of the country to drum up support for his claim. Meanwhile, Diyanah had been pleased to discover that his host in Opara, the Marquess Charlotte de Champs, had also survived the massacre, but reconnecting with Aurelius and making the friendship of Martella and the others led him to move out of Charlotte's estate and in with Aurelius at the estate of Grand Duke Avernathus. He also made use of some of the spellcasters at the Avernathus estate to cast some sending spells, and thereby commune with his brothers back in Sofra Prefecture, bringing them up to speed on all that had happened in the capital since the Exaltation Day. "Although the future of Taldor remains uncertain," he had told them, "my strategic alliance with the Princess Eutropia is sure to pay dividends in my efforts to win a senatorial seat for the Frascati family." His eldest brother, Volto, was quick to point out that their own prefecture, Sofra, was deep in Pytherius territory in the south of the country, and that the local Grand Duke, Vobilar, whom Diyanah had embarrassed during the gala, had already pledged his support for the general. "I don't want to put you in a difficult position," said Diyanah to his brothers. "If it becomes politically expedient for you to name me a rogue member of the family in the future until this whole thing plays out, that should be okay. If Eutropia does win this thing, you'll be glad for the choices I made here." Volto and Vespero agreed it would be best for the family to keep their options open, and their true allegiances nebulous until it was clear which way the tide was turning. Marius discovered that repairing a mostly burned tavern by hand was hard work. He had labored hard, but by the closing of the week, he finally felt like he was making some meaningful progress. On occasion, Demi had also come out to help him as well. The tireless woman who carried herself like a noble, it seemed, had no difficulty putting some hard work in. She also had the ability to sing in such a way that it alleviated the burden of work, which came in handy as well. Demi had, like Aurelius, spent some time catching up on the fallout of the massacre, and had also invested in some strategic alliances. In particular, she built up some favor with Lady Helenara Lossus, whose family held the strategic Yellow Canal, which ran through both eastern Tandak and western Kazan prefectures. She was one of many powerful women who on the surface should have supported Eutropia's claim, but who were fearful of coming out publicly in support of her, should that road lead them down the path to a civil war, something which many in Taldor wanted to avoid at all costs. Demi had concluded that planting the seeds of a strong alliance early would serve her and her patrons' interests the best in the long run. It was in this context that Martella's summons came, inviting them all on a short carriage ride to a tidy townhouse in the Aridans View district. Though they had been through a harrowing experience together, Aurelius, Diyanah, Marius, and Demi were pleased to reconnect all together, and with Martella, who seemed much reinvigorated and shared the ride with them. Inside the townhouse, a cozy fire and the scent of tea warmed a small library. The friendly and familiar form of Eutropia's hound Taldogus trotted over to investigate her visitors, wagging its tail and returning satisfied to its owner's side, who rose from her chair. The princess addressed them. "My friends, I wanted to express my gratitude in person for rescuing my old schoolmate Martella. She is a dear friend, and I am in your debt. You have already done so much for me, so I hate to ask for more, yet I find myself in need of you yet again. You are bold and resourceful, yet apparently relative unknowns on Taldor's political stage. Those are all incredibly valuable assets. Now more than ever, I find myself in need of talented allies. My father, Pharasma rest his soul, seems to have been convinced my efforts at social reform were the precursor to usurping his throne. Some dear friends had even warned me that he was acting erratically, and that he might even try something at the Exaltation to prevent the vote from passing the way he thought it might. You may have noticed the lion blades on the scene in response. All that being said, I'd never imagined that he had slipped so far." Eutropia took a moment to compose herself, and then she continued. "Apparently his paranoia was greater than any of us could have imagined. You have heard the claims of the Grand Strategos Maxilla Pytherius. According to his account, my father formally adopted him in a private ceremony to declare the general his heir. He has presented documentation to support his claim, and experts have apparently authenticated these documents, and my father's signature has been validated and verified," explained Eutropia with more than a hint of exasperation in her voice. "That means nothing," said Aurelius. "Pytherius could easily have gotten your father to sign under duress. Even his insanity at the event smacks of some kind of magical interference. It seems obvious the entire event was orchestrated by the general to seize power. He presents himself as a straightforward warrior, but he is more guile and cunning than he lets on. You can't just give it to him. He'll destroy Taldor. I know personally what a terrible person he is." "Oh, I don't mean to give in," said Eutropia. "I'm just outlining the facts as they are now, so you know what I'm up against. There are even those nobles who believe the vote against primogeniture could not possibly have taken place, or it was coerced by those same elements that attacked the Senate." "Also preposterous," said Aurelius. "Why would you attack the Senate after you won the vote? It doesn't make any sense." "If I won the vote," said Eutropia, "many of our citizens don't know what to believe right now. They are having a difficult time differentiating fact from fiction, and Pytherius is selling a very different narrative from mine." "So what do we do?" asked Aurelius. "Well, let's start with the good news. The Ulfin Guard have sealed the palace and refuse admittance to anyone until the question is resolved. Normally this kind of issue would fall to the Senate, but with the Senate decimated and no emperor to approve new members, the situation is entirely unprecedented. Baron Vinmark has suggested the Grand Dukes decide, but seeking a unanimous decision from among them seems unlikely. Nevertheless, now is the time to win favour and influence, before swords are drawn." Aurelius nodded. "I can't speak for my friends, only for myself. I don't know if you're the best candidate for the throne, but you have the right name, and you seem to have a good heart. Most of all, though, I know that Pytherius is a warmonger and a regressive traditionalist. He preaches about waging war on the upstart colonies and bringing them back into the empire by force. I won't let him march us into an endless war, so you have my support, unequivocally." Demi also stepped forward. "You also have my support, and the support of House Falspar, whom I represent. We sit on a border with Galt. We have seen firsthand what the ravages of civil war can do to a country. We will support you, but we seek a peaceful resolution if possible. Even now, Galtan exiles flood across our border from that war-torn nation. We shouldn't be willing to subject Taldor to the same." "On that count we are agreed," said Eutropia. "But the only way to be sure is to gather an unstoppable alliance, so strong that Pytherius could not hope to best us in the field." Hypothetically, if we support you and you win, you'll be able to name new seats to the Senate, right?" asked Diyanah. Eutropia laughed. "Yes," she gave a sidelong glance at Martella. "You will have your Senate seat, and I suspect much more, if you help me in this war for the crown, Lord Frascati." "Then tell me what to punch, for you have a monk of the fabled Step Temple of Jedifar at your disposal." Marius turned to the princess, but also half turned to Martella as well. Working with Martella, and of course, making your acquaintance, Grand Princess, has been the very great honor of my life. But if I'm truthful, all I ever sought was a simple, honest life. I would very much like to repair my tavern, and return to that simple life." "I understand if you want to repair your tavern," said Martella, "but before you reject this proposal, I would like to walk with you on the grounds and share my thoughts. I'd like you to understand why I want you to help us in particular, and perhaps then you'll agree." She turned to the princess. "May I have a moment, Your Grace?" "Please, take your time," said the princess. "I will confer with your other friends." The princess indicated a map on the table. Various sections of Taldor had been drawn out on the map, indicating their relative allegiances, either to one side or the other, or independent and needing to be influenced. Meanwhile, Martella and Marius walked the grounds together. "So, what can a half-orc barkeep really do for you?" asked Marius. "You can be our heart," said Martella. "I'm not sure I follow," said Marius. "It's difficult to explain exactly," she said, "but I've observed you. When you are insulted, accidentally or intentionally, you shake it off. You do your best to do the right thing. You see the best in the country, even when it's at its worst." "Well, last week may have shaken my resolve in that regard, at least somewhat," said Marius, thinking on the massacre. "Well, I hope that it does not remain too shaken," advised Martella. "Look, you want a nice tavern to call your own? Help us win this thing, and I will build you the very nicest, from the Lothid family coffers. But in the meantime, if you believe in Taldor, and you have said many times that you do, then help us make it the best Taldor it can be." "You are very kind," said Marius, "but I'm not sure what difference I will make." "Marius, I was born to this life. As the bastard daughter of a powerful noble house, I was thrown into the deep end of a political game of scheming and backstabbing. Thankfully, Eutropia's father was so distant, she actually missed the worst of it. This has meant that I've been able to keep her hands clean, even when difficult work was required. I'm totally compromised in this regard. To win the war that comes next, well, Eutropia's hands may not be quite so clean by the end of it. Every compromise she makes will colour her perception of Taldor and of the world, and what it takes to be a ruler. Before the end, even if we win this, we may see two versions of Princess Eutropia yet to emerge. Eutropia, the builder of bridges, the uplifter of Taldor, or Eutropia the conqueror, who brooked no challenge to her rule." Marius mused. "I suppose that's true. And you think I can help tip the balance somehow, in one way or another?" "Yes, I do. You are common-born, but you have raised yourself up through nothing but your grit and your determination. You have faced every adversity, yet you still strive to see the best. Through you she may yet see the promise of what Taldor can be. The rest of the team I gathered that night of the art auction all represent facets of Taldor, an ambitious young noble seeking advancement, a noble and scholar once exiled, now returned, and a foreign-born woman in service to yet another one of the great noble houses. But you are something different." "Only in that I have no ties to the nobility at all," concluded Marius. "Precisely," she said. "You are the Taldor we do not see, but that Taldor we need to see if we are to make a real change. Let me make the hard choices, and let you inspire Eutropia, and give her the hope that we can do better. Please join with me." "You have a gift with words, Martella," acknowledged Marius. "But I agree, and I'll hold you to them. When this is done, I expect to own the finest tavern in Eastport." "If we are alive when this is all over, it will be so," she assured him. When Marius and Martella returned to the others, they had been poring over the map for almost an hour, discussing the very many players on Taldor's political scene, figuring out how each one individually might be swayed and where their greatest chances were. Martella picked up with them without missing a beat, as if she already knew exactly what they had said on each subject. "Yes," she confirmed, "our greatest strength lies in the north of the country. Oparos will remain neutral until the rest are decided. So will the provinces, and likely Creris prefecture because of its heavy dwarf population that likes to remain neutral. Porthmos will declare independence. Grand Duke Thestro Briarsmith has always treated his prefecture as if it were his own private country, and the lure of independence is so great he will serve neither us nor the other side. That may be a problem later, but we can use that to our advantage to secure our power base in the north for now." They watched as Martella sketched over the map they had been working on, indicating the areas that she considered not relevant to focus on. "In terms of allies, I think we can count on Grand Duchess Malia Denzani of Kazan Prefecture," suggested Martella. "I've also been building support with Lady Helenara Lorsus, and the territories between Kazan and Tandak Prefecture could be encouraged to pledge for Eutropia as well," said Demi. "Not to mention our close friendship with Grand Duke Avernathus," added Aurelius. "I did save his life after all." which brings us to Tandak. If we can persuade Grand Duchess Caesara Tiberan to declare for Eutropia, then between Tiberan, Lausus, and Denzani, we would control the entire line in the centre of the country, from the west coast to Avanathus' territory in the east, further protected by Briarsmith's independent claims just south of that. Have them all come out at once, and maybe Pythierius could be dissuaded from a war altogether, concluded Martella. You have other support in the north as well, continued Demi. As I've said, my mistress, the Grand Duchess Falspar, will declare for the princess as soon as I tell her it makes sense to do so. If the rest of the north goes, so too will Grand Duke Hescelar of the Creris Prefecture and the dwarves of Crevencus and the World's Edge Mountains. They'll go as the wind blows, as will probably the Verduran Forest and the Wildwood Druids. So the linchpin is Tiberan, said Aurelius. Remind me what her politics are? It's complicated, said Martella. On the surface, she should be favourable to our perspective, I think, but governance in the entire prefecture currently stands on politically shaky ground. The previous Grand Duke, Forath Bosbelly, popularised a rumour that he had won his title as a war hero, but the underclasses of Casimir were so displeased when he was exposed as a fraud that the riots that followed saw the deposed Grand Duke torn limb from limb and publicly hung in Casimir's harbour. Tandak Prefecture's new ruler, Grand Duchess Caesara Tiberan, is Bosbelly's niece, but she now watches breathlessly, hoping this single outpouring of violence was an isolated incident rather than the genesis of a Galton-style popular revolt. She won't move until she knows the people will support her, and moving the people is no small feat. But I do have a plan, and you, Aurelius, are the heart of it. Me? Said Aurelius with surprise. I've not just been sitting still for the last 5 days healing up. I've been going to the archives, trying to figure out my every advantage in the conflict to come. What do you know of the extended Betinos family? Just that my father was the last of his line? Or I suppose I'm the last of the line, as far as I know. Well, my research shows that during the Dragon Plague the family line split. The Betinos line moved south to Sofra Prefecture, where you were from, but the family in the north's name changed to Bettany over the years. They settled in a county called Meratt, a county I know quite well from my youth, in fact. I even believe I had met Baroness Bettany at some point. You see, Meratt County sits in the Duchy of Lathamir, which is currently being run by my father, Duke Mercator Lothede. Ah, said Aurelius. Your father. I assume based on how you've talked about your family that we can't count on his support. No, indeed we cannot, but his position is similarly precarious, and I think it's time for a regime change. But I'll need your support. I'll need the Count of Meratt County to support his ousting, and my taking over. With the duchy in pocket, we'll have the right support to convince the Grand Duchess to claim for Eutropia. The north will be secured. So, you think because I share some distant blood with Baroness Bettany I'll have some influence there? Actually, it's somewhat more interesting than that. Lady Alice Bettany died nearly a decade ago, leaving behind no heirs. The barony and its lands have gone largely ungoverned since. Its largest settlement, the town of Stakis, has been governed by the local sheriff, who has also been acting as tribune for the barony. However, as I've said, I do have some pull with Grand Duchess Tiberan. She just doesn't have the confidence yet to support our cause publicly. So I took the liberty of sending her a letter honouring your blood claim to the estate and its lands. My what? I'm sorry if I should have spoken to you about this first. I wasn't sure she'd accept. But she sent back a letter certifying my research has proved true. Without heirs, you are the best inheritor to the Stakis barony. Congratulations, Baron Aurelius of House Betinos, on your new lands and titles. Welcome back to Taldor. Everything that once belonged to the Lady Alice of House Bettany now belongs to you, by blood right. Princess Eutropia smirked. I'm very glad you're on my side, Martella. We wouldn't have a chance in this if it weren't for your sharp mind for politics. Okay, said Aurelius. So just to make sure I understand, I go to Meratt County as the new Baron of the Stakis barony. And then what? I support your claim to depose your father and take over as Duchess? Oh, if only it were that simple, said Martella. There is more than one Lothede, I'm afraid. I have many relatives, and none of them are particularly nice. The county is currently lorded over by the Count, my half-brother, Bartleby Lothede. Ah, said Diyanah excitedly, the one whose bottle of fine wine we spoiled at the gala. Marius caught a slightly disapproving glance exchanged between Eutropia and Martella coughed slightly and said, Yes, the very same. So then what? Said Aurelius. We persuade him to see reason and support you over your father? I'm not certain, said Martella, but we need the support of Meratt County and its people. As goes Meratt, so will go the rest of the duchy, and in turn the prefecture. There's little love lost between Bartleby and myself, but he is still my brother. If you can, talk sense into him, though to be honest I'm not sure he'll listen. The Count of Meratt County has to support Eutropia, but that Count doesn't have to be my brother. If it becomes a question of his life or the mission, I won't hold your choices against you." "Now hold on," said Marius. "In our talk just now, you told me you wanted me to be the heart of our little enterprise." And he gestured with finger quotes as he said the word heart. "And now you're asking me to be complicit in the murder of your own brother to secure some votes. This is not the way." "Now you understand exactly why you're here," said Martella. "There is a better path. I just haven't figured it out yet, but maybe you can. There is precedent, for example, in a vote of no confidence. If you can demonstrate to the other barons that Bartleby has been ineffective as count, if you have the unanimous vote, you may be able to replace him without conflict." "What do you think the disposition of the other barons is towards Bartleby?" asked Marius. "I don't know well enough," said Martella, "but I'll do my research, and we'll debrief you on each of them so you can formulate a plan as we get there." "Okay," said Aurelius. "I think the plan is starting to shape up a little bit in my head. Just to be clear on our objectives, we go to Meratt County, I establish myself as the new baron of the Stakis barony, we win favor with the people of Meratt County, we win favor with the other barons, and then we depose your brother or convince him to support you in Eutropia. This sounds like it'll take some time. How long do we have before the lines start getting drawn and Pytherius starts assembling an army?" "I think we have 8 to 10 weeks at the most," said Eutropia. "We need to form our northern line by then, or he'll start advancing north at the head of an army. He needs to know before then. If he does that, he'll be met with force." "That's not a ton of time," said Demi. "Do you think you'll need to head back to North Tandak and Lady Falspar before then?" asked Eutropia. "No need," said Demi. "I've been in touch via sending spells. She's given me autonomy to support you here. I think my time would be best spent helping Aurelius in his endeavor." "I'm glad to hear it, Demetria," said the princess warmly. Aurelius turned to Marius. "Hey, it's not just Martella that wants you to help, by the way. I'd love to have you. Every baron needs a loyal knight bodyguard. What do you say to that, Sir Marius of Whitemarch?" Marius chuckled. "Okay, you've convinced me with your promises of false titles, Aurelius. Though I'm not sure how many in Meratt will believe it." "I believe you can sell it," winked Diyanah. "We have little time, though. We should head to the county in all haste." Martella breathed a sigh of relief. "I can arrange to have us travel up to Tandak Prefecture early tomorrow. The carriage and horses will be yours to keep, as you can't very well be seen walking to the estate. I'll be riding on to Casimir once we near the county border, as it wouldn't do to be seen in my company. As I said, there is little love lost between my brother and I. You will also need a valet, Baron Aurelius, and I have an old friend that will serve you well. I'll arrange to have him meet us on the road. Take care of anything you need to in Opara tonight, and meet me here tomorrow morning. Now I must spend the rest of the day making arrangements for tomorrow and the weeks to come." On the Opara highway, riding from Oparos Prefecture to Tandak Prefecture. It had been some time since Marius had left the big city, and as he looked out from the carriage, he was reminded how beautiful the Taldan countryside could be, especially in the months of spring and summer, when everything was abloom. Beyond the road, a patchwork of fields stretched as far as the eye could see, each plot meticulously tended by skilled hands, painting the landscape with shades of green, amber, and russet. Quaint villages, their stone cottages weathered by time, were nestled here and there amidst the verdant expanse, their thatched roofs peeking out from a sea of greenery. Their travel was not uneventful. They kept good time, but needed to periodically rest the horses. They would stop for lunch and dinner, and in the evenings, if there were townships nearby, they would stop at a roadside inn before setting off again in the morning. In these moments of respite, Martella would use a wand of animal messenger to send missives, and on occasions ravens would come to the caravan, guided by similar magic, bearing a message for her. On the third day of travel, she explained that the barons of Meratt County had been informed of their coming, and of Aurelius's claim to the Stakis barony, supported by the Grand Duchess. Her half-brother Bartleby had even responded by animal messenger, expressing his great excitement at the prospect of a new baron finally coming to fix up the town of Stakis, which had suffered greatly since Lady Alice's passing. In fact, he suggested that rather than going directly to the Bettany estate, which likely needed repairing, that they should instead head to the Palace of Birdsong, Bartleby's holding in the county capital of Lothidar, where he would hold a jubilee in their honour. "You should agree to this," said Martella. "You won't get a better chance to meet all the barons in one place and get a better lay of the land. You've practiced your politicking at the art auction and at the gala. You know how to take advantage of a garden party. I've seen you do it." The party agreed, and Aurelius penned a response to Bartleby's request, which they delivered back to him by animal messenger again. "Count Bartleby of House Lothede," he wrote. "It would be our sincerest honor to visit with you in your home and meet the other important lords of Meratt County. Thank you for arranging a party for us on such short notice, though we will have traveled far and would be happy with even a modest gathering. Do not feel the need to put yourself out on our account. I come with just a small company, only 5 in number, my personal valet, my bodyguard Sir Marius, and 2 friends who have agreed to help me get situated in the county, the senatorial hopeful Lord Diyanah of House Frascati, and the Mistress Demetria, who serves as proxy to the Grand Duchess Breatis of Falspar on the Senate." After another day of riding, a reply came from Bartleby enthusiastically telling them there would be 2 days of festivities, and that almost all the barons had agreed to come out to meet them on their first day in Meratt. They stopped for lunch at a village close to the Meratt County border, and sought out a mapmaker in town. Martella bought a local map of the neighbouring county, and then carved it up with a pen, as she laid out the various baronies and their barons for the party. "Here's what I know. Okay, Meratt County comprises 6 baronies. The Lothedar barony covers the grounds from Lake Stavian and the Opara Highway to the northeast of the county. It comprises the county capital of Lothedar, located here, and it is ruled from the Palace of Birdsong, located just on the outskirts of Lothedar, where you are all headed. It also includes the tiny hamlet of Kaskina, located far northeast over here. Although it is located at quite some distance from Lothedar and the rest of the barony, the slightly larger village of Newtown also falls under the governance of Bartleby Lothede, and governance of Newtown has been given to my idiot cousin, Titus Cassava Lothede. You will find him unswervingly loyal to Bartleby. Your small barony is located here. It comprises the Bettany estate, the town of Stachys, and stretches as far south as the Beggarwood down here. The second largest barony after the Lothedar barony is the Okera barony. It occupies the southeast portion of the county, and it includes the Okera estate and the town of Pensaris. It also includes the majestic Pensaris Lake, which I remember to be quite beautiful, as we took little boats out on it when I was just a girl." Demi interrupted. "Baron Okera was the one with the military record you had me speak to at the gala. Actually, many of the folks we spoke to were from Tandak Prefecture. Did you have any notion then of how this would all play out?" "I wish I was that clairvoyant," replied Martella. "And I did know that Tandak would be important, but I had no inclination about what was coming that night, I promise you. I'm glad you've already spoken to him, and the fact that he seemed to like you means you've already made some significant headway, at least with one of the barons." "Who else is there?" asked Aurelius. "The third most important barony is over here, the Voinarum barony, important because it includes the largest stretch of the vital Meratt Canal, including a chunk of the Stachys Spur, which provides fresh water to your township of Stachys. Baroness Voinum counts 2 cities in her barony, the town of Voinaris, where her estate can be found, and the smaller town of Soto to the north. Next to Voinaris is the Crabby barony, run by Dame Parthena Crabby, whose estate can be found near the town of Moost. I know next to nothing about Parthena. You'll have to get your own read on her yourself when you get there. Similarly, I know little of Baron Tellus, of the Tellus barony, which occupies the southwest of the county. His town is called Jambis, and is located here." They folded up the map after lunch, but along the ride they continued to pick Martella's brain. They soon exhausted what knowledge she had of the county, based on what she had managed to gather in the last few days, and what she could remember from summers in her youth spent at the Palace of Birdsong. Towards the end of that day, Martella stopped the cart abruptly, as the sun was just starting to set. A rider was on the road ahead. "This is my friend, as promised," she said. "I will be taking his horse and proceeding on to Casimir, the capital of the prefecture." "Rankle," she said as she came out of the carriage. Rankle did not look like Martella's typical acquaintance. He seemed like a simple peasant, mouse-brown hair, 5 o'clock shadow on his face, and a floppy hat on his head. He came off his horse like an experienced warrior, though, and his movements were precise and confident as he grasped her hand. It was evident from her tone and expression that they were old friends, but his expression was controlled and impassive. Only the slightest twinkle in his eye suggested he was pleased to see her. "Your letter was cryptic. Tell me a little more about what help you need here." "This is Aurelius of House Betanos," she said. "He is the new baron of the Stachys barony in Meratt County. He finds himself in need of a valet, and likely will need someone with your unique skills to support him. You can get the broader details from them directly." "And I can consider them friendly, then?" he asked. Martella seemed to understand some subtext to what he was asking that was lost on the rest of the party. "Yes," she said. "In fact, it would be best if they really knew you, and they knew of your capabilities." "Very well," he said.
New friends, I will show you myself as I really am.
A mirage faded away around him. Aurelius was surprised that even with his own considerable magical gifts, and his mastery of illusion magic in particular, as a mage of the Veil, he had not recognized the nature of the magical disguise. Just as soon as the disguise was dropped, an elf with shock-white hair and skin of greyish-purple was standing before them. "A dark elf," said Aurelius. "You keep strange company, Martella."
"I am not like the rest of my kin," said Rankle, "and I have lived in Taldor for many years now. Martella and I have been friends since she was a very young woman. I saved her life once, years ago, when she was still studying politics and alchemy at the university. We have been friends and allies ever since."
"You can trust him," said Martella. "I promise you that. He is an oracle, a kind of occult spellcaster, and his powers come from the First World, the domain of the Fae. This will prove a valuable asset, as most spellcasters, both arcane and divine, will find his powers difficult to detect and hard to interpret. He will seamlessly pose as human, while using his subtle powers to acquire intelligence from the many men and women who work in the service to the lords and ladies of Meratt County. He knows the duties of a baron's valet, and he will make you look like you know what you're doing in your new role." Rankle smiled and shifted back into his human guise.
"My lord, you may call me Willem, if it please you, of Elba Creek. Rankle is a name for close friends only."
Martella wasted no time in taking Rankle's horse off of him. Her own valet, a lean but unusually tall halfling who had been conducting the carriage, joined her on the horse. "I wish we had more time, Rankle, but I really must be off. We'll catch up soon. Help Aurelius and the rest of the team. I can't explain all the details now, but know that this is the most important thing I've ever asked you to help me with." He nodded at her in understanding, but said nothing in response. So, with that, she rode off into the twilight, leading the party to their own devices. You know how to drive the carriage, right?" asked Diyanah awkwardly. Rankle, or rather Willem, smirked back.
"Of course. All aboard. I'll get you where you're headed."
They rode on for another few hours, until the setting sun began to recede so far beyond the horizon line that setting up camp would prove difficult. They were only a few hours from the southern border of Meratt County at this point. There were no inns or taverns nearby, and the light would be too bad to make it all the way to Pensaris, the closest town, so they took the carriage slightly off-road and set up a small fire. The countrysides of Taldor were relatively safe and settled, especially when compared to other more remote parts of the inner sea, but there were still wild wolves in these lands, and other larger predators on occasion as well. As they prepared to bed down under the stars, Aurelius apologized to Rankle, if his surprise at him being a dark elf had upset him in any way. Rankle shook his head and simply noted that he was used to it. "I would love to hear your story," said Marius, "if you are comfortable sharing."
"I'm happy to share it," said Rankle. "What do you know of the elves of the Darklands?"
"Very little, if I'm completely honest," said Marius.
"Okay, settle in then. We'll start at the beginning. When the elves first came to Golarion, they settled in two principal locations in Avestan. In the woodland realm of Kionin, not far north of Taldor, and in the forests of Mirani, located at the border of the Ulfin realms of the Linorm kingdoms, and the rugged coastlines of the homeland of the Verisian people far to the northwest. Then, 10,000 years ago, a calamity befell our world."
"The Earthfall," annotated Aurelius.
"Precisely. The elves of Kionin fled by way of the Ayadara, the elven waygates, but there was a problem with the great gate at Kelwynvian in the final hours before the fall. Some ancient force had beset the gate network. Elsewhere, we would later learn other elves fought this enemy in the Mwangi Expanse, but their victory would prove too late for my kin. 20 great families remain trapped behind in the Mirani forest. These are not families as you might understand them. You might think of them as tribes, perhaps. The 20 tribes descended into the Darklands. They became the Aindalar, the Cavern Elves, which surface folk sometimes call the Dark Elves. The 12 most powerful and most renowned tribes eventually swore themselves to the service of 12 ancient demon lords. These are the 12 great houses of Zirnakainen, and it is these treacherous houses that most typify our kindred in the minds of the surface folk, wicked, cruel slavers and conquerors of the Darklands realms. A 13th tribe has also acquired some similar infamy, which were exiled by the 12 houses to the even deeper realms of the Darklands known as Orv, where they worship Urgathoa and rule over an underground kingdom of the living dead. But of the 7 other tribes, on the surface, very little is known. I descend from one of the 7 lost tribes of the Aindalar, and we no longer speak our names, for fear of our fallen kindred who hunt us. My tribe survived the long years of the Age of Darkness by building alliances with the Drathnalar, the Deep Gnomes, who fled to Golarion during the Great Exodus from the First World. Me and my kin grew up near Duimavel, the capital of the Deep Gnomes. I always desired to change the world for the better, but the plight of the Darklands seemed so hopeless to me that I thought I'd be better served journeying to the surface. I have been in Taldor for some 30 years, and Martella and I have known each other for 10 of those 30.
Elves can live for centuries. How old are you? Asked Demi.
I'll be 74 next year, he said.
Good. I'm 88, so it's nice I can remain the wisest and eldest member of the party. Rankle cocked his head slightly. Are you now?
We've been speculating she might be a vampire, chuckled Marius.
I'm not a vampire, said Demi. There are just rarer things under the glimmering moon of Golarion than cavern elves on this night. Tell us about your abilities, said Marius. Martella described you as an oracle. What is that exactly?
Are you familiar with the 4 traditions of magic?
Arcane, divine, said Marius, and he paused slightly. He was out of his depth here.
Yes, those are the big 2, agreed Rankle.
Druidic magic, said Marius. Primal magic, it is more accurate to say, corrected Aurelius. He, of course, knew all this, but he was enjoying listening to this exchange. It was also interesting to him to hear someone explain this that had been educated in a very different circumstance to his own, and who had come from a very different tradition.
Yep, primal magic, often thought of as druidic magic or nature magic, but its power actually draws from the 6 elemental planes. What is nature, after all, if not the interaction of elemental forces? Arcane magic draws from the binding forces native to the universe. It requires careful study to master, years of it, as Aurelius can no doubt attest to.
It comes easier to some than others, said Aurelius, but yes, it needs to be learned.
Divine magic comes from the gods, continued Rankle. That power is summoned into mortal worshippers through the practice of prayer. Notably, divine magic typically confers the greatest powers of healing of any other kind of magic. And then there is the 4th tradition, perhaps the least well understood, which is the occult tradition, sometimes called the esoteric tradition. Occult magic is in some ways the most varied, and while scholars like to draw neat lines around things, the world is rarely so simple as we wish to make it. In some ways, occult magic is the random grab bag of leftover traditions that don't fit neatly into the other categories. Demi's bardic magic is considered part of the occult tradition, though her magic is powered by music, and her connection to a supernatural music that connects us all. Oracles follow a slightly different tradition of occult magic. We acquire revelations by studying the deeper mysteries. Depending on the mystery we study, we may possess different abilities. I myself am a follower of the mystery of whimsy. That is a fey mystery, and I began to learn the ways of the First World from the deep gnomes of my homeland, whose connection to the First World is quite strong. You have already seen my guise of many faces, he said, and transitioned between several different human likenesses. But you have not yet seen that I can disappear from sight entirely when needed. He then vanished and disappeared, only to reappear a moment later. I also have knowledge of several spells, much like Demi and Aurelius do, he added. The nature of occult magic is that it often emulates the powers and abilities of the other 3 traditions. Bards and witches have magic spells of a nature similar to those of arcanists. Shamans are occultists who can be likened to primal spellcasters. But oracle magic is more akin to divine magic, at least in terms of the types of spells I can learn.
So you can heal like a cleric, said Marius.
Not quite as effectively, he said, but yes, I can. So, I imagine, can Demi.
Demi nodded, though my magic is a scarce resource, and it will be good to have another healer in the party.
Very well, he said. I will endeavor to keep you all alive, then. So yes, Marius, I can heal like a cleric, but I fight like a rogue, striking from the shadows and retreating before I am discovered.
And he whipped his scimitar in a fancy display before them, before elegantly resheathing it at his hip.
We have spoken long enough now, and the hour grows late, said Rankle. I will stand first watch.
There's no need, said Marius. Demi here always keeps watch, as she doesn't require sleep at all. Demi gave Rankle a smug wink.
Rarer things indeed,
said Rankle to himself as he settled down for the night. Demi sat on a rock and allowed her night vision to take over as the campfire dwindled down to embers. She sang a sweet lullaby as she waited, her enchanted words helping the party to drift into a deep, dream-filled sleep. End of chapter. Hi there, I'm the Mythkeeper. Thank you so much for watching. You've just watched Season 2, Episode 1 of my Pathfinder 616 War for the Crown series. This was a fun one to write and shoot. In many ways, this episode is very, very similar to Season 1, Episode 1. It's a setup episode. Essentially, what I'm doing is I'm laying out the adventure to come in Book 2 of War for the Crown, Songbird, Scion, and Saboteur. In this book, the heroes go to a place called Meratt County. They're responsible for kind of setting up a town. There's a bunch of sub-mechanics that will get established as part of that kind of town building that occurs in this adventure. But really, this is setting up the goals and the quests. One of the, I think, big differences between this episode and the first episode of Season 1 is that in this episode, you start to see that my version of reality is deviating somewhat from the version of reality that exists in the books. And if you're running adventure paths the right way, that is normal and is expected to happen in your adventures. Essentially, every single player that is at your table is going to bring a little bit of themselves to the story, and you're going to want to make sure that whatever story you're telling works narratively for your playgroup. And sometimes that manifests as subtle shifts to the storyline, and sometimes those subtle shifts have like domino effects, so they'll have more impacts than you think they will. One of the examples in this particular episode is the kind of conceit of Meratt County. So in the session where my players got together and they spoke to Eutropia, I had a map of Taldor laid out, and my players were looking over the map and they were asking in character Eutropia and Martella about the various Grand Dukes and their dispositions, and we had these little colored tokens and we were sort of marking where they were. And that discussion sort of organically drove their mission. So in the adventure path as written, there's something of a MacGuffin in the Palace of Birdsong. There's a set of documents that are important to Eutropia that will give her access to financing that she'll need to win the war. It became clear in the telling of my story that they didn't need this MacGuffin. Just by looking at the map and seeing the way things played out and the alliances, they realized that Tandak Prefecture was going to be really important. And as a result, I didn't need that as a MacGuffin, and I discarded it, and I just made it about overturning Count Lothide as a way of winning more support for Eutropia's cause in the north, and thereby building this northern line that they were looking to build that kind of divided the country and gave them essentially a strong defensive position against any military advancements that Pytherius would enact. And those decisions had some other consequences. One of the big differences in my adventure versus the published adventure is that Martella's father, the Duke Mercator Lothide, is still alive. So in my version of reality, you have Duke Mercator Lothide, and then under him you have Count Bartleby Lothide, who is the Count of Meratt County, where they're going. One of the reasons why I made this change ultimately, again, sort of came organically from the story as we were sort of puzzling this out, is that my players really wanted to feel like they were controlling the Eutropia's mission and were the driving force behind it. And in the book as written, the players go off to Meratt County essentially on assignment from Martella Lothide, right? She basically says, you go here, you do this thing. And then she gets up to her own adventures, but the book is not explicit about what those adventures are. And I knew that my playgroup really needed to know what she was doing and how what they were doing was informing what she was doing. And ultimately, what I settled on is, well, Martella's doing the same thing at the duchy level that they're doing at the county level. And so it's this whole set of dominoes that have to go in the right sequence in order for them to be successful and to change the point of view of the Grand Duchess of the entire prefecture. So that little difference, we'll see how much it changes down the line. This is a game that I'm still playing. We're in the middle of book 3 as I'm recording this right now. But that kind of thing can and probably should happen. And as we go through the various future episodes, I will highlight the differences between what I ended up doing in my adventure and what was in the published adventure, where there are differences, so you can know what those choices are and why I made those choices, and it can help inform the way that you run your games in the future as well. I hope that's helpful to you. And I hope you enjoyed watching this little GM aftermath that I do here. I can't wait for you to see the next episode. Be sure to like, subscribe, do all the good stuff, and I'll catch you next time.